Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, the podcast where we cut through the noise and expose the gaps putting our enterprises and infrastructure at risk. I'm your host, Gary Mullen, and today we're tackling a truth most companies don't want to face. Your OT environments, the lifeblood of manufacturing, energy, and logistics, are the weakest link in your cybersecurity strategy. But there is a way forward, and it requires a new model, the Cyber Fusion Center. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Cyber Fusion Report, where we explore the real-world intersections of cybersecurity, operations, and resilience in industrial environments. I'm your host, Gary Mullen, and this is episode 5, Who Owns Your Building Security? Today we're diving deep into the risks behind the systems that keep your buildings running. HVAC systems, lighting, access control, fire, elevators, and more, all now IP connected, remotely managed, and too often completely overlooked in your OT cybersecurity strategy. Joining us are two leaders who've been on the front lines of this, transforming the mindset around building systems and OT security. Terry McCorkle, our CEO and founder of FishCloud, and Fred Gordy, the Senior VP of KMC Controls and Technical Advisor for BuildingCybersecurity.org, widely recognized as one of the industry's most experienced voices on securing building automation systems. So gentlemen, let's jump right in. Fred, the first question comes to you, and let's start talking about visibility. When every building system, the ones I mentioned a moment ago, are now IP enabled, how do you even see what's connected and who's really managing them?
That's a great question. I got to say this, though, before we get started, is I have to thank Terry for putting me in this wonderful world that I'm in now. He was one of my early mentors, and actually, one of the first stories he told me about is what got my appetite whetted was when, Terry, I don't know if you remember this or not, but being able to get into a particular manufacturer device and actually go in and get into the building, and you guys did that through that system. So that's how I started my journey. And one of the first tools that I picked up, and most people probably know, is Shodan. And oh my gosh, you don't even have to know how to do any special queries or anything. You can just put names in there. For example, BBMD, which is a BACnet broadcast management device. You do that, and then all these things pop up, and you can pretty much own them. From there, I started learning of other tools like Census, but I also felt I took a direction for a little bit where I was using some of the more sophisticated tools, but I took a step back and I'm like, wait a minute. There are free publicly available tools, Census, Shodan, ZoomEye, some of these other ones. And if I am able to find stuff on there and show somebody, look, you don't have to have special skills to find yourself. You can just use these tools. To me, that had a much more impactful message to the building owners. So to go back to your original question, how do you find them? They're easy to find. You can use most of these tools, and with just a little bit of sleuthing, you can figure out who it is. The other thing is what got me down this road was I started working as a system integrator, the guy that actually installs the stuff. So I like to tell people I'm the problem because we started setting these buildings out there, and it was all about accessibility. It was nothing about security. So we set these systems up to where you could put a public IP in there and you can get to them. Nobody is managing that. Nobody is overseeing that. Well, I don't want to say nobody. The majority of commercial buildings, usually the person that has the most knowledge of the system is the system integrator. The facility guys just run the building, not taking anything from them, but they rely on that system integrator to help them run their buildings. So you combine all of that, lack of oversight and fully exposed, piece of cake.
It's an interesting point, Fred, is that most organizations don't understand what's there. And when you look at why, like that was one of the big things when we were looking at these vulnerabilities, we kept saying, why are we in this situation? And this was back 2013, right? And at that point, there was about 50,000 building management systems online. Everything from hospitals to fire departments to police stations, you name it, we were able to identify them. And what's also scary about those systems that were online is they were configured in a way that you could actually connect to them and download all of that information to understand exactly who the systems integrator was. And once we started diving into that and kind of peeling back that onion, we realized there was even a common practice for these building integrators who have installed this system, who are now responsible for partially maintaining or updating or providing service around that device. They would actually buy an entire block of IP addresses and use the same password on all their machines. If you found one building management system, and then you look in the same subnet, you would oftentimes find hundreds of building management systems that were all maintained by these suppliers. And if you figured out the password for one, you would figure out the password for all. And so it's important to realize that this is an aspect of managing your property or managing your building that doesn't often fall into security controls, but is critical to your operation, especially when we talk about operational technology and manufacturing environments and things of that nature. They really make a big difference.
They talk about the human firewall. I've been hearing that lately a lot, but it's a culture, and I came from that culture. Like you said, there's a financial reason why, and the system integrator I used to work for, we did it. They started doing integration in 1998. When I came to work for them in 2006, they had the same username and password for over 2,000 systems that they'd had since 1998. Do the math. People leave, people come in. Then you fast forward to when I met you. It was still that way, Terry, in around 2013. And after spending time with you and you scaring the crap out of me, I said, okay, so we started adjusting. But going back to the culture, it is a culture thing, but it's also a financial thing. And what I mean by that is, as service providers, we were always trying to make things easier for our customer. And so, give them value. And one of the values is, look, we can sign an annual agreement to take care of your system. And if we have remote access to it, then what we can do is if something goes wrong, we can either fix it remotely or we can diagnose it so when we show up, we have everything we need. And I won't mention any hospital names, but there was one that I did, and it was connected to the internal hospital network. But for some reason, they didn't think that was good enough. So they said, can we get to it remotely? Well, I put a second NIC in that the front end, and put it on a public IP. So I just kind of more or less bridged into HIPAA violation. And then the last thing, when you mentioned talking about the system integrators having the same common username and password, I mean, you inspired me. The article years ago, I won't mention the name, but I read that article how you guys had found something and then started looking around, and it was that common username and password, and I'm like, well, that's what we do. So fast forward to about 2-3 years ago, everybody's heard about the Colonial Pipeline thing. The group that did it was DarkSide. They're out of business now because they didn't really want to get noticed. They just wanted money. Well, prior to that, DarkSide actually stumbled into, and I can say these names because these articles are out. You can look them up. This Boston Children's Hospital. They got into it and they were like, whoa, wait a minute. We don't want to have anything to do with this. They notified the system provider, which was E&E Systems, that, hey, we're able to get into one of your systems. You might want to take care of it. We're not going to touch it. And E&E Systems' response was, we don't have a problem. So DarkSide reached out to databreaches.net. Databreaches.net hired an independent cybersecurity researcher. He looked at it, and sure enough, it was. And the FBI was notified. And as far as I know, they took care of it. Well, then using those tools, Sensus, Shoda, and Zuma, I started looking for licenses that had that vendor name in it. And I've got a slide where I show all of these institutions around the Boston area that this integrator was servicing. So my suspicion is they all had the same username and password. I didn't test it, obviously.
Well, Terry, let's talk actual risk, right? It seems like there's a real blind spot between building management systems and cybersecurity systems in OT, and it seems like many of these building control systems are managed remotely through by the vendors. So what's the actual risk to the organization then when, the vendors have those credentials, update servers, monitoring VPNs, all of these become new attack vectors to OT, don't they?
Absolutely. And I think one of the big things we're seeing, especially around the OT space, is that the supply chain attacks are becoming more and more regular. So these vendors that have access to what are critical systems, but are often not treated as critical systems, it's rearing its head more and more. As you look at the industry and the way they've approached it, Fred was pointing out that it's very common for them to install two network adapters and have one going to the internal network and one on the external. So essentially you're you're using your building management system as a bridge, right? Now, looking at building management systems and how they actually work, when you get down to the software levels, a lot of times there are multiple layers of software on there. So you'll have your base operating system, which a lot of times is a QNX or some kind of Linux. On top of that, you'll have some kind of virtualization software. It could be C# or Java or something else that allows you to build out, what would be the graphical display and all the connectors. And then you'll have services that are running in the background that communicate using BACnet or whatever the protocol is for that network. So from an attacker's perspective, if they can gain access to that machine, they can potentially drive down to be at the operating system level, which has no monitoring, very rarely is logged, is almost never monitored by the security team as an access point that they want to monitor. But from a risk perspective, it actually presents a huge risk to the organization. If you run any kind of facility and you're not monitoring your building management systems, attackers could potentially get in, ransom that device, and lock you out of everything in your building.
I'm assuming in some of the red team assessments you've done in OT, you've actually used that as an attack vector?
Absolutely. One of the big areas that we spent some time on, and when we were doing a lot of research into vulnerabilities in the operational technology space, the building management systems came up very quickly because they serve a very similar function to a lot of other devices in the OT world, right? They control points, they control access. But because we could actually access it, use exploits at an application level to get down onto the operating system, that allowed us to then pivot from that device to the internal networks. And so while people may not think about it as an access point, a lot of times it is, and it's just not controlled by their organization. So think about it from a couple of different levels of risk. One, yes, we could use that device to pivot into your corporate network potentially, depending on how you've got it configured. But even if we can't get all the way into your corporate network, a lot of times that device is sharing a DMZ with your access control system, so building controls, and for the building as well as for things like parking lots and parking spaces, right? The cooling and air conditioning for your facilities. So when you look at those sort of, I would say, operational level risks, there's a risk for ransomware at that level. There's a risk for pivoting into the corporate network. And there's also a risk for gaining access to building access controls and physically being able to walk in. Those are the sorts of impacts that we were able to actually identify and show while doing red team assessments is we're able to get into this device and pivot into your corporate network through this device, which if it's anything like most organizations today, there's no monitoring at all.
Right.
And who would think, oh, well, we need to go check the building management system to make sure they're not coming in through that, right? It's most likely going to look like some strange IP on the network you've never seen before. That's how it'll manifest itself. But the reality is the operational impact from losing control of your building management system, whether it's a third party risk and somebody was able to get all their credentials and do this, or whether it's an attacker who's leveraging that directly to get in, it can be used to shut down an organization. And it's not an easy recovery.
Well, I mean, real world example, a situation I was involved with is it took this one company 92 days to fully recover.
Wow.
Now, the building wasn't empty for that entire time. And I've got a presentation I do to show people in the building community that this is not necessarily about, it's really more about operational resilience. And what I mean by that is keeping the doors open, keeping people in the building. So every time a building has to be empty, the building owner owes money. So I always ask these guys, okay, how much does it cost if your building is unusable for a day, 2 days, 3 days? Because tenants are not going to sit in a hot building without lights. They're going home. And then the companies will ask for refunds back on that. So in the particular case of the 92 days, I won't go in detail, but essentially ransomware got on the system. They backed up the bad stuff, did a restore. The next day they came in. The system was still online, but the building was hot. And when they went to investigate, and this is the part that's scary to me, is it sounds like somebody that knows what I know. 3 of the VFD's variable frequency drives were hosed up. 3 pumps had been. If you're not familiar with cavitation, that's not the important part. The important part is it pits the pumps and makes them unusable. 3 controllers were bricked. They couldn't be used. But also, you had 2 300-ton chillers sitting over there. So, to be sure, they had to tear both of those down. In the meantime, they had to call every rental place they could find to get portable cooling. A rental place may have 1 or 2, 3 or 4, but not enough for a typical building. So, just ask yourself, how much does it cost for you to send your tenants home?
Exactly.
Really quick, I'll jump on that because you bring up a very interesting point that I think a lot of people overlook. If you own a building, you understand that if without those environmental controls, a building dies. A building cannot be in any kind of climate, but hot, cold, the contraction and expansion of a building when it's not being environmentally controlled. We have buildings even here in my neighborhood that, they've been empty since COVID, for example. They're breaking down, they're falling apart. It's unusable at this point because if it's not maintained properly, it will break. And I think that goes across the board when you're talking about a building management system. The controls that they're designed to control, are there for a reason. And the buildings without those controls, they start breaking down and falling apart, and it gets incredibly expensive.
Well, that makes this next question even more important. And Fred, this is a little over my head, so you'll have to educate me. But we talked the other day about the IEC 62443, and it's supposed to be the blueprint for securing industrial and building automation systems. But half or fewer of vendors actually claim to be compliant, and a lot of those that do are only partially compliant, which is leaving huge blind spots in the OT/IT fusion. Why are so few vendors and even operators actually compliant? And how can enterprise?
Okay, so, I tend to call myself the step cousin of ICS because BCS, building cybersecurity, and building control systems and industrial control systems, there are similarities, But we don't have the regulations necessarily that the oil and gas and power and that those kind of people have. Everything in my world is money focused. Okay, so just like I talked about the access, 443, in my opinion, for this environment is one of the best standards to use because of its history and how it grew up through the industrial side. So there's a lot of applicability to this world. The problem is if you try to dump that entire stack on a building owner, they're going to go, no, no way. I'll risk it. I mean, you're talking about having to assess every one of my systems, come up with a risk profile, then apply all of these, rip up every SLA that I have with my service providers, and start over. That doesn't make economic sense. So what you have to do is take, people say crawl, walk, run. I say you got to go to kindergarten first because then there's grade school and middle school and high school and college. If you drop a college algebra book on somebody in kindergarten, they're just going to throw it on the floor and make paper airplanes out of it. And that's kind of the same thing in this world. So I'm old enough to remember when OSHA first started coming around. And I worked between my senior year and my first year in college, I went to work offshore. And it used to be if you were afraid to climb 80 feet with no harnesses or whatever, you were considered a wimp. OSHA came along and everybody was fighting it. But there was a very valid reason for it being there. And the last company I worked for that I was talking about earlier, who's an SI, if we climbed above 6 feet, we had to tie off. How did that come about? Well, it wasn't just, it was a culture shift, but then there was also a business case for that. So I go back to, as a building asset owner, look at your portfolio, determine your highest critical, and then the highest critical buildings, highest critical systems, and ask yourself 3 questions. Do you know what you have? Do you know how it's connected? Do you know who has access? And that I can tell you from experience, 80% of them can't answer all 3. 95% of them can't answer 1 or 2. So it's all money oriented. It has to be right sized and it has to be well thought out and it has to be budgeted for because risk is something they're willing to take. But when you tell them your building's going to be closed for 5 days, what does that cost? Okay, well, I can get an assessment. And one last thing I will say, I think Terry will back me up on this, is every assessment that I've done over these years in the United States, Canada, Australia, and those are the 3 countries I've been in specifically to do buildings, they're always the same, pretty much. I could write the report before go in. The biggest thing is you can't monitor these systems because they are on disparate networks that were set up by the vendor. The lighting control guy set up one network, and it's a Class C 192, 168. The HVAC guy did the same thing. The access control guy did the same thing. Elevator, so on and so forth. So being able to monitor all of these networks, you have to architecturally change them. And go ask a facility guy if it's okay if I re-IP your network and rip out your switches. They're going to look at you like, you can leave right now.
We like our unmanaged switches. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, they're easy. I can plug up into any port.
Never gives me any problems at all. Still got a hub out there.
Mm-hmm.
And when was the last time you ran into a hub, Fred?
Wait a minute. I got one.
Yeah, I got one later in the back. Anyways, you're absolutely right. And I think there are interesting ways, like you said, we have to point them to a monetary reason why they would want to do this. And some of the interesting things that I've seen. So I'm not just a red teamer. I'm a huge fan of analytics. I spent 4 years at Splunk learning about machine learning and how to apply those techniques to operational technology. So before we had what is now considered AI, we were working on the machine learning models that are behind AI, the ones that they take a huge issue, they break it down into math, they do the math comparisons, and they bring back anomalies, right? one of the areas we've been successful working with organizations on is understanding the data that comes out of these. To Fred's point, there has to be a reason for doing that. Well, predictive maintenance is an area that a lot of the systems integrators, some of them are starting to get into it. It's really a product-based play today. But if you up level it, it's really a data play. If you have the data from the building management systems in conjunction with your other operating environments, not only does that put you in a position to be able to identify if something is going on from a security perspective, but that data can be leveraged to actually help automate or better facilitate the management of your facility and better facilitate how organizations can become more proactive and predictive in nature. So building management systems do offer some unique visibility points that others do not. You can understand power and power measurement and what's going on within power consumption in your environment. You can understand the control points and some of the errors and warnings that may come off of these devices when something's about to fail. And using those data sets, you can actually start doing predictive analytics and save the organization money by tuning and watching and monitoring for things that are about to fail so that you don't have to close the building for the afternoon because one of your condensers went out, right? Those are things that some organizations, the ones who have put some time into this, that have campuses that they have to maintain, they go as far as to even predict how much power they're going to use for the year and bulk purchase that so that it can actually be leveraged for, saving money. And as we get more and more into the future state, there was a huge push for smart buildings and smart cities, and it almost seemed like it was a fad, like it came and now nobody's talking about it, right? Because those smart cities now have cars that drive around them without a driver, right? So they figured out how to implement it at that level. But there's so much that can actually be done for building management owners, even if you're just leasing to tenants, right? Getting down to the point that you understand exactly how much power a tenant uses. That's direct cost translation and savings for your organization if you can show and pass that cost on, right? So there's just I would encourage people to think outside of the box when it comes to building management systems, from an attack perspective as well as from a monetary savings and even predictive analytics perspective.
Well, that ties right back to operational resilience. I mean, that is the way you understand how your building's running. So that's why I like to when I'm talking to somebody, I'm not saying cybersecurity, cybersecurity, cybersecurity. Let's keep your buildings operational. Let's help them run as efficient as possible. I don't care if you call it a smart building, whatever you want to call it. We basically want to wring out as much money that you can get out of your building as possible. And then to your point about the data from an attack side is, I don't know if you appreciate us mentioning his name, but a guy that Terry and I both know and love, and I have a lot of respect for his brain, is we were doing work for a large somebody, and Osama bin Laden got shot. Big thing came on TV. We got Osama. The next morning, he sends me an email, and it says, "Where were you when Osama bin Laden got shot?" And I looked at the thing, and it was a chiller load log, and it's like, dude, what are you smoking? What are you sending me here? He said, look at it. And this particular company, let's just say, they monitored situations like this. And that announcement was at 10 o'clock, but at 8 o'clock that night, 7 or 8 o'clock that night, there was a spike in consumption. So he and I started watching stuff like that. And you can not only figure out things about your energy, but it can also be used against you. Because if a bad guy knows the highest occupancy time of a building, he can figure out the best time to blow it up. That's sad, but it's true.
So that ties right into the next question, and I'm going to kind of combine two questions here because I think they're germane to each other. So if a system is owned, if it's hacked, right? What is the real operational and safety impact, and How do you balance between giving service providers access to maintain systems, but maintaining your own security posture so that you don't get hacked, you don't get owned?
So, and I've been asked similar questions, but I mean, the topic's the same, the theme's the same. I always like to go back to the lowest common denominator. So, if you watch Jurassic Park, the first one, there was a goat on a stake.
Yeah.
They raised up out of the ground. There's the little goat. T Rex comes in, gets him. In my world, going back to the Shodan census and all of that, it kind of equates to if I'm canvassing a neighborhood to see which one I want to break into, I'm going to probably skip the ones with the, such and such security system. Well, get yourself off the internet. I mean, those are easy to get to. So that's a low hanging fruit, little no cost, little bit of time. You can take care of that. The service provider has got to be an integral part of your team so that you both coordinate the best way to make that happen, but still allow you to be serviced at an efficient cost. Because if you just shut them out, you just increased your service agreements by probably tenfold because they're going to have to roll trucks every time. So I wish I could say that in all the time I've been doing this, I got a magic bullet, but I don't. But it goes back to the three things. Do you know what you have? Is there a good accounting force there? Do you know who has access? Probably not. And do you know how it's connected? Why not? Figure those things out first with your vendor.
Yeah, I do think it's important to highlight some of the things that an attacker could actually do. And Fred, you've seen some of the examples. I mean, we even go back to some of the laboratories that were doing testing that demonstrated blowing up a generator.
You guys are amazing.
So the reality is those generators are oftentimes directly connected to these building management systems. And if you think about all of the things that make a building go, right? You've got generators, you've got power coming in, right? With varying controls of what you can do with that power, right? You've got access to control things like chillers and air conditioners and fans, right? So you can control the environment. And think about a lot of the businesses that have such critical demands around their manufacturing or around controlling their facilities. Some of them are frozen facilities, some of them cold, some of them, if you don't have air conditioning, they'll get too hot for people to work in, right? So think about a building from, it's a shell that allows your business to run. And if you don't have visibility and control of that facility itself, who knows what an attacker might be able to do. Every environment's different. But to Fred's point, maybe they brick it and make it so that you've got to tear out an entire system and redo that, which takes months. Or if, in a worst case scenario, somebody could make something explode. And we've seen in recent news where that's actually happened. Proven that there were cyber attacks that caused massive explosions and death. And it's horrible to see, but it's something that people have been talking about for a while.
I'm sorry, Terry.
Go ahead, Fred. Go ahead.
Well, I want to brag on Terry because this was one of the things that really got me hooked. And I'm going to be 100% honest. Terry knows stuff that I don't. What I know is how a system should run. I know how you can kill it, and that kind of thing. But one of the most amazing things, to go to your point about what hackers can do, was when you guys had me just set up a Jace. And I said, well, I got to put a station in, and I have to do this, I have to do that. And y'all were like, nope, don't have to do that. You had a little Arduino and a pump over there to run. And my building controls mind was like, there's no way they're getting to it because there is nothing configured in this controller. And I was sitting there watching, and then all of a sudden the balloon blows up. And I'm like, how do y'all do that? The reason I'm bringing this up is hackers don't think like you think. They don't work in a logical stream that you do. They work for a desired end result. Whatever it takes to get there, that's what they're going to do. So don't count them out because you did X, Y, and Z, or you didn't do X, Y, and Z. They're coming.
So, kind of a takeaway from all of that is a hacker doesn't have to hack into your SCADA system to shut down plant line. They can just turn the power off.
It's one way to
Yeah,
look at it.
Plain and
yeah,
simple.
plain and simple.
I will throw one thing out there as far as, there are some old school techniques that still work to protect these types of systems, right? Nobody wants a dial up, but the reality is dial up will get you what you need. I've worked in several government facilities and we had switches, right? If somebody needed to dial into it, you go flip the physical switch. Not a network switch, physical switch. You go up, you flip the thing forward, and now they can connect. As soon as they're done, it gets unflipped. They don't live in these systems, right? These integrators don't live in the systems. So they don't have to have constant full-time access. They have to
But
have
they
the
do.
ability to access it. Now, as they mature, some of them will be looking to do more and more of that online management and things of that nature. So maybe that changes, but if you're in if you need to have a secure environment, you should definitely have some kind of physical control that limits access to your physical controls, because that is what a building management system is at its root, is something that will make a physical effect in the real world from a digital device.
I want to make this a little bit off of that topic, but I kind of want to go back to something Terry said earlier, and I meant to bring it up a minute ago, but along the lines of attack in these systems. Another thing I didn't point out is in all of the assessments that I do, 80–90% of the time, the control systems are sitting in the engineer's office. They're not like oil and gas where it's this nice control center. They're just PCs sitting there. And these guys, that 92-day thing, is because somebody was using the head end or the HMI. In my world, we don't call them HMIs, it's the head end. They would check their Gmail account on that machine. And it's like, okay, this is 100% avoidable if you didn't do that. But the other thing that they do, living off the land, these things are rich for that. And what I mean by that is there's so much stuff that shouldn't be stored on those that is. I found password lists. I found bank information. I found divorce decrees. I found pictures of goats, and I kid you not, I don't know why. So even if there is no direct connect over there, you can these guys know enough to go in there and at least scope around. And a buddy of mine that I know at another company, that's the first thing he does is try to get in and see what he can find on those head ends, because it's usually a wealth of information that will help them get into the IT side.
Yeah. The engineering, to your point, the head ends or engineering workstations are the areas that, as an attacker, as a red teamer, that's one of your biggest sources of information. They're probably gonna have all the points defined, right? They're gonna have So if you can get into a system, you can kind of figure out what's going on by looking through it. But it's going to be highly dependent on the level of configuration they've actually done on that device as far as what you can understand. But you get to that engineering workstation, you get to those systems that are used to configure these devices. And it's exactly what Fred was saying. You find the password list, you find the device list, you find everything you need to move forward. And at that point, you just look like that user.
And everything's in plain English, so I can tell whose office is what, and
Hmm.
everything's listed.
So you got facilities who typically run, the building control systems. You got IT who obviously runs the corporate systems, but they try to secure OT as well. You got the OT team who's keeping the plant going 24/7. It seems like there's a lot of fragmentation around the data that actually could and does play into a cybersecurity strategy. So how does that increase the risk, and how do you unify that and get rid of those silos so that you have a central security strategy that covers all of those domains?
Let's raise it up a level. Before we even get to the data, the fragmentation exists in the people. So the facility guys, the culture has been, we don't talk to IT unless we need to. The IT guys are like, that's just something else I got to take care of. Nobody's told me to do it. I'm not going to do it. So there is no willingness to cross over. So not saying that we ignore what you just said, but you have to attack that first. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've been involved in things where it was like dragging two divorcees into one room and telling them they had to talk. And it's like, okay, guys, this isn't a case of yes or no, we're doing this. It is, we're doing this. So let's figure out how we make it work.
And I think to that point, Fred, this is an executive ownership, item, and they follow the money. So if you really want to make improvements in this space, you have to sell the business case for why this is going to save them money. From a security standpoint, I'll say what I've said a lot lately, and that is, how do you know the difference between an operations issue and a security issue? Well, in the industrial control system world and the building management system world, it's very difficult to tell the difference unless you understand your data. And if you're going to spend the time to understand your data for cybersecurity, you might as well flip it on its head and say, let's understand the data for our business. Let's understand how we leverage this data to better run our business. And as an outcome of that, you get security use cases that give you visibility.
Well,
So
that gives you traction.
correct. But I've never seen anybody just say, we're going to go secure our building management systems now. It's not something the CISO is even thinking about. He's got a network that sits inside that building that he's got to maintain, right? Now, a couple of things just to point out here. These aren't just everyday facilities we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got some buildings, in the city that maybe they're smart buildings, they're owned, but like the commercial real estate world is very focused on making money. This provides them avenues to make additional money or better understand their investments, better understand their business, but it's probably not the biggest driver that's going to get them. Now, you go look at it from a different perspective. You've got these massive buildings that are running data centers. Now, a data center building management system is even more interesting because not only do you have the backup generators and all of those things, but you've got a cooling system that is usually a row-based cooling system. So you'll have cold air going up one and you'll have hot air coming down another. And if those systems go out, you got 5 minutes before the data center starts overheating. And I've seen it in real life, and you want to see a bunch of IT operations folks going crazy, watch the cooler break in a data center because they're running around shutting down all those machines in a manual process. Those are the sort of things that I want people to realize. We're not just talking about, an office building to think about here. This is your data centers. These are your manufacturing floors. These are the places that have controls in place, safety mechanisms in place, and they're built from the perspective of trying to keep it running, but not necessarily from a resilience perspective like what we're talking about, where resilience means secure and monitored, right? You can't have these resilient systems without understanding the data that's behind them. So what is it you're protecting and what is the actual threat? That's where I think people need to look at is how would this system impact our business if it was compromised?
Well, do they even have the tools to correlate data across IT and physical and operational domains? Do they have that visibility today?
Most do not. However, it is something that is available.
Well, and to go to the use case of data centers, and I want to throw in hospitals as well, is I kind of cut my teeth. I cut my teeth in the real retail space and data center space when I first started doing this. Before I met Terry, I was working for a named entity and doing their power monitoring all across the United States and programming it into one centralized location. the thing that even before I was security conscious is when I first started working there, I'm looking at all the chillers and everything, and I said, "Where's, they got PDUs and failover, AB, all this stuff, the generators, batteries, and all this." And I said, "Where's the redundancy in the cooling system?" And it's in a lot of instances there is none. So, and then hospitals, it doesn't have like. Well, let me back up. On the data center, there is no connection, physical connection between IT and OT in the traditional sense. But you shut down the OT, there is a connection to IT. Same thing in hospitals. There's two cases where people died because systems were made inoperable. One was a baby. The hospital didn't have that. I mean, everything was shut down from the monitoring standpoint. This woman was having a baby. She gave birth. The umbilical cord was wrapped around its neck. They couldn't monitor the heart rate or anything like that. Brain damage. 9 months later, the baby died. In Germany, there was a woman who was being in an ambulance, and they called the hospital. The hospital at least had the sense to say, "Hey, our systems are down. You need to go to another hospital." The other hospital was much further away. She died. So there's physical life safety issues here. Then one last thing is it can also be your system integrator that does it. Look this up. Equinix in Singapore had their system integrator updating their control system. And they got in there, they weren't planned properly. Citibank and DBS Bank were co-located there. The system integrator did the update. It locked the chill water buffer tanks out. They couldn't get them going again. The data center shut down because of cooling. But here's the interesting thing. Citibank and DBS Bank was not prepared to fail over to their other data centers they were co-located in. It was just a domino effect of things that went wrong, and it was not a bad guy. It was the system integrator who didn't do his due diligence and have a rollback plan.
I think that's actually, you brought up an interesting point, and that is, what kind of redundancy do you have? But more importantly, have you tested your plan? Your
Never have.
recovery plan. Is this even something you've considered? And I think if you look at a lot of businesses, that resiliency, and that this is a missing piece to that resiliency that is actually at the foundation of it all.
All right, so I know you guys can talk about this all day long.
Yeah.
But let's wrap this up with one final question. What does real success look like?
I have an opinion, but go ahead, Terry.
I think success changes depending on where you are in time and what the capabilities of the civilization are, right? We are lucky enough to live in America where we have a lot of different resources, right? You look at other countries, many of them don't have the resources we have. When you look at the resources we have, a lot of them are built on these foundations that are oftentimes overlooked. And so for me, success is understanding the systems that help keep your business running, and understanding the data that can be leveraged from those systems, and understanding the way that it can actually, help your company be more resilient, help your company understand, their posture better. I think more importantly, it's also getting it to a state that we can allow things like AI to take over portions of not decision making, but looking for anomalies, looking for the little things that a assessor might not necessarily look at, but should be considered every time. So we're in a world where the technology is changing rapidly. Things like AI allow us to get a better handle on this. These sort of tasks that people have been doing for years can actually be automated now. And you have to do it cautiously. You have to be careful about what you do. And I'm not talking about taking Chat GPT and connecting it to your network, okay? I'm talking about small language models, things where you can build a bot and its job is to understand what that building management system usually looks like. So it can tell you there's something strange going on here that needs some human eyes. And those are the sort of things I think are going to help us be successful at incorporating what has largely been just a completely ignored area in cybersecurity, but is foundational to everything we're doing.
So my view of success, everything Terry said, I 100% agree. But I look, like I say, going to the lowest common denominator. Because I don't see it now, what tells me that we've gotten the first step of success is communication. Communication between the knowledge keepers of their respective areas, IT, facilities, system integrators, that kind of thing, and build that team and actually begin to share why these things are important, what the value of it is, because when they finally start doing that, I've seen it. It's like light bulbs going off in people's heads. To me, that's success because we've got a long way to go.
I think that's a very fair outlook. The people first, for sure, but we need to make sure we can teach them what's possible.
Exactly.
This is not an art of imagination anymore. This is what's possible, and it's real, and it just has to be acted on.
We've got a long ways to go. That's a great way to wrap up this episode of the Cyber Fusion Report. What we've heard today is more than just a warning about vendor exposure or overlooked building systems. It's a call to shift how we think about critical infrastructure security. Because the truth is, the building systems we've long considered behind the scenes are now frontline targets. They're not isolated anymore. They're IP connected, remotely managed, and deeply integrated with enterprise networks. As Fred Gordy reminded us, these systems aren't protected by luck or paper policies. They require visibility, coordination, and constant validation. And as Terry pointed out, you can't patch your way out of a structural blind spot. You need fusion. You need cyber fusion. The Fish Cloud CFC model isn't just a new tool, it's a new way of operating. One where IT, OT, and facilities and vendors are no longer in silos, but part of a unified, resilient defense fabric. One where AI supports decisions and not replaces them. And one where security is measured not in alerts, but in avoided outages, safeguarded operations, and tangible business continuity. If you like today's episode, don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We've got more conversations coming that you won't want to miss. Until next time, stay aware, stay aligned, and keep fusing security with what matters most. This has been the Cyber Fusion Report podcast. Thanks for joining us. And for more information, please visit www.fishcloud.com or email us at cfc@fishcloud.com. Thanks and have a great day.